Welcome. Resistance is futile. Like and subscribe. I don't sound anything like Jean-Luc Picard when I say that. Wow, that was wild. I saw like a huge color change. Wow. See, I don't know if you can see that. It looked really yellow. There was like, it went from blue, and then everything looked really yellow, and then it kind of corrected itself. Welcome. Thank you so much for being here. It is Saturday, July 20th, 2019. We're going to talk about what happened 50 years ago today. And I was, 50 years ago today, I was 3 years old. I'm drinking the hard stuff tonight. That's milk. That's what happens when you get over 50. I'm like, what do I need before a show? I need milk. It doesn't do your body good. I'm really not endorsing milk, but I love it. I'm personally addicted to it. So if you saw a title for this show talking about a bird, a particular cockatoo that has been, shall we say, influencing the show from a distance, strange action at a distance, perhaps. We were going to have the bird on. We had a perch set up in here, and I was going to bring him on, and we were going to talk about him and then talk about another topic. And while we were getting the bird ready, he jumped down off of his cage onto my partner's head and bit her ear. Oh, hey, my volume is still turned up. Never do that. Anyway. So, yeah, I was prepared to have the bird on, talk about the bird, but what I'm going to do is scan through the the chat room. I just looked to see who's in the chat room. But, you know, I think there are a lot of other shows on right now, at least two others that I know of. So it's intense competition for our audiences. But so Michael and Sherry, welcome to the show. I'm so glad you could be here. Anyway, so I did decide to pick a topic, and I was hoping to get some feedback. Mark Torana, thank you so much. So I am going to switch to the topic tonight of the Apollo 11 program. I don't want to beat a dead horse. I know it's getting a lot of attention, but I think it's a big deal. And not so much to just recount the history of it. I think that's readily accessible to a lot of people. But I want to talk about Apollo 11 and what it means to you personally, and how it has affected your life, if at all, in your opinion. And conversely, what do you think are not so much long-term future in space exploration? I think it's a little bit hard without really being a well-educated futurist to really project that far. I think we have a hard time gauging where technology might even be. I mean, 30 years ago, I don't think we imagined that we would be here where we're at technologically. And I think that it's very easy to say that the same thing holds for 30 years in the future. I think there's going to be some innovative technologies that we just that's science fiction to us right now, but at least our consciousness has opened up and we can see the possibilities and perhaps think in a more progressive way in terms of technology now than we could 30 years ago, because now we at least get some kind of real world application, look at the impact on our lives and see what the possibilities are for technology. And 3D printing certainly goes along with that. And I think we're going to find, I did read an article earlier this week where they're going to deploy some 3D printer into orbit. I can pretty much guarantee you that robotics and 3D printing is going to be the probably mid to long-term future of space exploration for us. that we will print the components and probably assemble everything in space. Where this business of, we might use a rocket to get some computer cores up there and stuff like that. Maybe some internal electronic hardware components. But I think overall the mass of any future space station, military platform, or science exploration, I think it's going to be based on robotics and 3D printing. But I don't want to just talk about what I think about it. I'm hoping that more people join us and that I can use that input to gauge what that's like. Mark Tarana says Apollo changed the way we thought about the Earth. Many initiatives were commenced when the world saw the moon rise image, and I think that's true. It's interesting because the political climate was pretty turbulent. We were in the throes of the Vietnam War. Protests were happening. There was a lot of division within our culture, and the kind of hippie generation was coming to power, and they were being very iconoclastic and kind of tearing down the norms of society as we knew it up until then. And there was a great push and pull, and people, rightfully so, did not want to get drafted and sent to another country and killed, maimed, or otherwise negatively affected for the rest of their lives over something that was, I don't know, as convoluted as the basis of the Vietnam War. So the space program was a uniting factor at that time as well. It didn't really matter whether you were a hippie that was going to go to Woodstock, or whether you were a dyed-in-the-wool military person, or a housewife in a mainstream family. For that time, when Apollo 11 with Michael Collins, Buzz Aldrin, and Neil Armstrong, when that mission left for the moon, it united all of us. And when they landed on the moon 50 years ago today, it once again united the world. It united cultures, religions. At least for that day, we were all one. We were humanity. And I think, even though I think our motivation was to prove our technical superiority as a nation, I think that the achievement overall for humanity was such that in that moment we knew that it kind of spoke for all of us. And they handled the occasion with the solemnity that it deserved at the time, and recognized that, those three Americans were representing humanity. I think if we had to do over, if there was another first mission to the moon now, I think we would see diversity. I think we would see women go. I think it would be multiracial. And rightfully that should be as well. So that's something else to consider. But and I'm going to give this a second for maybe the chat room to build up. And I'll talk a little bit about my personal experience. Even though I was only 3 years old, my birthday is in September. So at this date, my fourth birthday was a couple of months off. And you would think that I wouldn't remember it, but I do, because it was such a big occasion. I remember everyone gathering around the television set, and everything stopped. That's all that the news talked about. There was nothing else on television. It was the topic of conversation amongst all the adults. I'm not going to pretend that I remember in detail as if, I had the brain of an adult sitting there taking in the moment. But I remember more all of the hubbub around the event, people gathering. Certainly I remember, Walter Cronkite talking about it. And I remember seeing images of Armstrong coming off the ladder, and the images, because they were everywhere. It completely took over everything, as you would think. And I remember there used to be I don't know if they still exist. There was a gas station. It was a chain. It was called Gulf, Gulf. And these Gulf stations, actually my uncle, my grandmother's brother, owned one. and it was in our hometown. But if you went to a Gulf station during this period of time, not just for the moon landing, but later on throughout the whole Apollo program, if you went to Gulf and you got a fill up, they would give you this hardcover book that was covering the Apollo program and the astronauts and the moon landing. And I was always pushing for our family to get a fill up at the Gulf station. And I had a couple of those books. And I had it for a long time, well into my later childhood. I wish I still had. I would really like to, that would be a nostalgia thing for me to see one of those Gulf gas station books on the Apollo program. But I was hooked. As a kid, I was absolutely hooked. I wanted to be an astronaut. I couldn't get enough books about outer space. So, those formative years from 3 up until the Apollo program ended in the early 70s, those I remember coming home from kindergarten, and I lived fairly close to the school I went to, and I would run home in the afternoons and just to run in the door to see men walking on the moon. And it was, for us, at least in our home at that time, it was still black and white. And so I'd rush home. I would see these black and white images of the Apollo program. Obviously, I was in kindergarten. It was a little bit late. It was a couple years later, so it wasn't Apollo 11. It was other missions. But I remember seeing that, and our society was filled with this kind of new hope. We had reached the space age. Tang was being advertised on television everywhere, and it was what the astronauts drank. And I myself, as a kid, was influenced by that. And I was drinking Tang. If it was good enough for the astronauts, it was good enough for me. So I definitely was part of that that cultural experience. I think that being introduced to that kind of science at such a young age really helped me and the rest of my generation open our minds for other possibilities. I think that there was a before we went to the moon, and there was an after we went to the moon. And of course, being a very young person, not really participating in society, you're just a kid. But just seeing that and witnessing that and seeing the impact of that, and then growing up knowing that you could be an astronaut, that you could go to other places, that was a viable part of our collective culture. I don't know. I think it just gave us a sense of wonder. And in case you're wondering, I'm as old as you can be and be Gen X. The first year eligible to be Gen X was 65, the year I was born. So I'm as old. I'll be 54 in September. I'm as old as you can be and be Gen X. And I forget where the cutoff for that is, but that's where I fall in on that. And I don't know. I think it changed our culture. I think it changed our psychology. Let's see. Can't get the door. The bird's out again. The bird. The damn bird. It's okay. We had Tang over here in Australia. Mark, I didn't know you were in Australia. That's I had no idea there'd be this many people in the chat room. If you're watching this show after the fact, there are hundreds of people in the chat room right now. It is a blizzard of comments and jokes. You wouldn't believe it if never mind. So the Apollo program. What does it mean to us now? Technologically, I mentioned that it's going to be based on 3D printing, assembling hardware in outer space, or at least in a microgravity environment. And they're saying now in 2024 that we're going to go to the moon. And I don't know. Donald Trump has said we were going to the moon. Then he said we weren't going to the moon. And he just wanted to go to Mars. And then we're going to the moon. So I'm not quite sure if we're actually going to go to the moon in 2024. That might be just something he's saying right now because it sounds good for an election campaign. But I hope we do go back to the moon. And if we go back to the moon, do you think that will put an end to a lot of these we didn't go to the moon, we didn't land on the moon conspiracy stuff, or the proposition that there are alien bases on the far side of the moon away from us, and that censorship has happened? We have the famous incident. I forget the lady's name off the top of my head, but she was the photo analyst or photography specialist at NASA. And I've watched the video several times. I just can't remember her name off the top of my head. If somebody does, say what it is. Mark Tarana, audience of one. I love it. Gen X, 1965 to 1980. Yeah. So 15 years. I remember 1980. I wish 1980 would go away. Not really. I turned 15 that year. Let's see. 1980. Never mind. I'm getting off track. So are we going to go back to the moon? If we go back to the moon, are we going to put to rest some of these conspiracy theories? I'm not saying that there isn't alien artifacts on the moon or something on the far side. I've seen some not convincing evidence, but I've seen compelling evidence of that, of the photographic cover-up. And I think there's enough of that out there. I'm curious about it. I'm open-minded to that possibility. But I wouldn't sit here and say that I'm convinced that there are ancient alien artifacts on the moon. I haven't seen anything to really warrant that. But I would hope that more exploration of the moon would put into that. And I'm really quite kind of surprised that we let the Chinese land a device on the moon. And I literally mean that we allowed it. I really sure that when the Chinese sent their rover up to the moon that it was something was going to happen on launch, or as the stages were separating as it left the atmosphere, or on the way, or while the rover they sent was landing. I was certain that something catastrophic was going to happen. Oh my God. We do have birdage. We do. I want to introduce Ollie. This is Ollie has been in the background of the show quite a bit here lately. And it's because my wife has been working in the evenings and she is not home to sit with him during the show. And the sun goes down at this time, and he goes through this roosting behavior where he just raises hell. But this is Ollie, and this is who everyone has been hearing from 2 rooms away. He is not part of the Apollo program, although there are times when I would like to send him to the moon, like Alice. But not really. I love this bird. I complain about him, but he's actually very interesting. They have the intelligence of a 2 to 3 year old. Bring him on camera a little bit more. There you go. They have the intelligence of a 2 to 3 year old, and he had a certain call, and I created a series of calls where we do it 2 times and we do it 3 times. And even though we were doing 1, 2, 3, I was really trying to introduce the bird to the concept of counting, or just kind of playing with that. He added a 4th call in the series. So there are times from different parts of the house that we call back and forth, 1, then 2, then 3, and he added 4. So we go up to 4. So he's smart. He's moody. He doesn't like to be ignored. He doesn't like to be left alone. And it is so loud when he really, really screams and you're in the room with him. The volume is such that it literally hurts your ears. Like it's huh?
Decimal of a 747 jet.
Yeah. It's rough. And part of the reason that we hear him so much on the show is that the frequency of his voice combined with the volume of his voice is perfect for like going through the walls and the doors, and the frequency response of this microphone is such that it easily picks up that kind of that frequency. So it that kind of higher frequency sound cuts through everything, and makes its way here onto the show. But we're looking at taking steps to be able to cover him up and get him in a routine that'll get him quiet for showtime, because it has been somewhat disruptive a couple times, and we're taking steps to fix it. It's just that he's a living creature and he doesn't have an on and off switch, so we can't have absolute control over him. We have to kind of groom him into a routine. So I know that he has been on a lot of recent shows in the background, but we're working on it. It's just hard.
Your friend from Australia sees wild.
Oh, Mark Tarana sees them in the wild?
Well, they're from Australia.
We were warned away from the moon, he says. Good day, Ollie. Mark Tarana, he is a sulfur-crested cockatoo.
He's actually an umbrella.
They can live to 100. He's an umbrella cockatoo.
He's 40 years old.
And this bird right here is 40 years old. And bring him on camera a little more. What you see when he extends his beak up, like this clicky noise that they make, that is a friendliness. That's like a nesting, nurturing sound. But when he opens his beak that wide, and when he really extends his beak out, that's like pseudo aggressive. That's why she's tapping him on the beak, because it's a sign of aggression. He's not being outright aggressive. You would know it if he was, but he's a good bird. He just makes a lot of noise, and he's high maintenance. He needs a lot of attention. That's probably good. And we had a perch set up, and the perch was right in front of the glowing orb, and we were what we were shooting for tonight was to put him on the perch back there, and we were trying to do it early enough before the show started to get him up there, getting comfortable. There were a couple of cups attached to it with food in it, and we were hoping that he would just hang out back there and maybe not jump on my head and bite my ear like he did to her. But he was just raising hell at showtime, so we had to go without him. But yeah, that's the cockatoo. That's the source of the noise. He's a sweetie, though. Mark Tarana says we have hundreds of them in my area. Wow. I live, if you, I don't know how many people live in Orange County that watch the show or have been to Orange County, California, but I lived there for several years. And in some other areas down in Santa Ana, but I lived in Orange. And in Orange, every night when the sun starts to go down, there are wild parrots there, and they roost, and they all fly together, and they'll all go roost in 2 or 3 trees together as a group or whatever, but they all find a place, and they fly through the air over the neighborhoods and over the Orange Circle. There's a traffic circle in downtown Orange, and it's very old school. It looks like architecture from the Midwest. It doesn't look like a typical California architecture. As a matter of fact, that thing you do, the Tom Hanks movie, the restaurant scene was shot there downtown at the malt shop that actually exists, and the Orange Circle. If you've ever seen that movie, That Thing You Do with Tom Hanks, there are a lot of scenes shot in Orange, California, downtown at the traffic circle. Anyway, you can hear these green parrots, and I don't know the proper scientific name for the green parrots, but they're the common ones that you would think of sitting on a pirate's shoulder or whatever. And they just raise hell. They screech and they cry and they scream for each other, and then they all go and they still raise a lot of noise while they're roosting in the tree. And then as the sun goes down, they just settle down, they get quiet, but it's every night. And I don't know if it's like that down there in Australia. Some see them as pests. They can cause major damage with those beaks. Absolutely. I've got a scar on my finger to prove it. What's interesting, we went from Apollo 11 to cockatoos. What I didn't know before we got this bird, my partner knew this. I didn't know this. Their whole job is to like deforest and tear things apart. They literally destroy leaves and limbs, but they create what is kind of a natural mulch that helps provide the ecosystem with what it needs down on the floor of the jungle or subtropical regions. Not that Australia's subtropical. I'm not quite sure what Australia's. I know Australia has a desert. I'm not sure if it's all desert or what the designation is there for their climate. But so they deforest. That is what they do. They literally tear things apart. So if you see someone with a bird of that size and they don't have a lot of toys and things to tear apart and shred and all that stuff, they're really not being taken very well care of. Those birds need to stay busy. They need to have something to do. And if they don't have something to do and they're pissed because no one's in the room with them, then they scream in the background while you do your show. And that's how that works. So now that we've seen the bird, we'll circle back around to Apollo 11. Inspirational for Generation X. It opened up the possibilities for humanity. It pulled us together during a time of crisis, at least cultural crisis. I think America was deep in the throes of an identity crisis in the mid to late 60s, early 70s. And we were trying to decide who we are as a nation. And young people, smart young people, were coming of age, and they wanted nothing more to do with the old system that had been set up. And, you know, we saw a lot of things. We saw the beginning of the environmental efforts, the environmental causes, cleaning up industrial waste, the New Age movement, meditation, spirituality, drug culture began to flourish at that time. And so this was, for good or bad, it was all consciousness expansion, right? It was a painful growth spurt. But here we had this tremendous scientific achievement. A human being walked on the surface of the moon. You know, we left our home, our planet, and we went to our nearest satellite, and we proved that it could be done. And there's not one part of me that thinks that the moon landing is a hoax. There's no way. I am certainly open to the idea that I think they might have faked some of the photographs and maybe some of the footage just to make sure that they had something to show. I think there's a couple of things sketchy with some of the photographs, but also a lot of that stuff has been explained away, and I accept the scientific explanation for, you know, the resolution and why you don't see a star field in the background and stuff like that. It was the resolution of the camera, the way it was set up, and I get that. That makes total sense. So, but yeah, I think that there was a couple of jinky things about maybe some photographs and some of the footage, but I'm absolutely convinced we went to the moon. And were we warned off? Did the Apollo astronauts see something else on the moon? Did they see other craft? I'm open to that idea as well. It's not just wishful thinking or fantasizing on my part to hope that we ran into something up on the moon, but I think there are enough interesting rumors to at least keep our minds open for the possibility that something like that happened. And I took a tour of the Kennedy Space Center last year, and I lucked out. I got a guy who had been a tour guide there for several years, and he is semi-retired and only does the tours part-time. But this guy had deep, deep knowledge of the space program, and he knew a lot of the astronauts personally. And we talked about how different, if you like Michael Collins, we don't hardly ever hear from Michael Collins. We've seen him resurface as of late, do the 50-year anniversary, but you know, I'm sure he does lectures and stuff, but he's pretty low key. We don't see Michael Collins in commercials like we're seeing Buzz Aldrin in the IBM commercial that's campaigns running right now. And Neil Armstrong was so laid back, and he really didn't like the adulation and the attention. And I came close to meeting him once. I did, and I rarely get jealous, but my ex-wife worked for Andy Williams in Branson, Missouri. And one night, Neil Armstrong went to go see the Andy Williams show, and she got to meet him afterwards and have her picture taken with him. And she didn't really care that much about space or the space program. And So it was just like a thing like, hey, I met Neil Armstrong, and I was like crushed. I was like, Neil Armstrong was there and you met him and you don't really care. And that would have been life changing for me to meet him. But he was so low key. And this tour guide that I was talking to, we talked about the difference between Buzz Aldrin. Like Buzz is very out in the public. He does commercials. He's very outspoken. He's kind of wild. He's flirted with the UFO topic, obviously, a few times, and he like has played around with like hinting that maybe they saw something, or he knew something like of extraterrestrials, but then pulled back from that. So he's played cat and mouse with ufology. And this tour guy, he said to me, he goes, Neil was the perfect guy. They picked the perfect guy to be the commander for the mission. He went up, he did the job, he came back with humility. He kind of went back into his old life. He taught at the University of Cincinnati, and he just went on and led a quiet life. And he looked right at me and he said, as for Buzz, he said, he lives close to here and I see him sometimes. And he says, I don't think Buzz ever came back from the moon. He's still there. And I don't know. I like Buzz Aldrin because he is kind of a colorful personality. And I think that it's good to have someone associated with such an important historic event, something so sober, serious. And yet you've got someone that kind of likes to have fun with it and doesn't appear to take himself too seriously. And I loved it. I can't remember that guy's name, the dude he punched in the face that was following him around saying that the moon landing was a hoax. And Buzz Aldrin turns around and popped him in the face. Oh, I watched that video like 5 times yesterday. It's pretty funny. Let's see. Mark Tarana, for men who walked on the moon, they seemed very unemotional. I suppose. I don't know. I guess that's up for us to kind of use our internal gauge on what that really means. And that's not to say that they didn't have some kind of decompression on their way back, or that it was important for them to show composure to the media once they got back. And, when they were in isolation, when they were quarantined upon their return, I believe that was 14 days. It could have happened during that process too. I'm sure that they had psychologists talk to them and they were thoroughly debriefed. And if they did, in fact, have contact with alien race or saw technology or saw something that would be more profound than the basic mission itself, I'm sure that they would have to be debriefed on that and report that. So I don't know. I think that's a weird. I don't know. I don't know if I'm emotional. I would need a lot more information to make that kind of assessment. But I'm glad that Mark Tarana is in the chat room and participating. The press conference was very composed. It was. I don't think anyone can deny that the events leading up to the launch were choreographed. The events upon the return were choreographed. Everything was controlled. If you really want to see something cool, I'm not going to get into it here because I'm about to wrap up. But look up a video, Smarter Every Day. I just watched it the other day, and the guy went to the Johnson Space Center in Houston, and he went to the facility where they actually keep the moon rocks. And you should check that out. That is off the hook. You have to be double suited. You get an air shower, all kinds of craziness just to go into the room where the moon rocks are. And then they're still sealed in these packages and containers, and you can't touch them directly. And this might be a good trivia point to end on. Something I didn't consider until I watched that video was that obviously the moon has no atmosphere. It's a vacuum of space. They collected the moon rocks, but they put the moon rocks in a vacuum. And they're still sealed in a vacuum. And the moon rocks have never been exposed to Earth's atmosphere, because once they get exposed to Earth's atmosphere, they'll be chemically changed forever and will no longer be pure samples. And I had never even considered that possibility, to be honest with you. And I just thought, hey, it's a moon rock. You could look at it, but I didn't even think that any interaction at all with our atmosphere would chemically alter the composition. But yeah, that's what would happen if that happens. So there's your bit of Apollo 11 trivia for the day. Mark Tarana, it's interesting how they could not remember seeing stars. Yeah, no, that's true. No, I'm not saying there aren't wajiggity things about the Apollo 11 mission or following missions. Um, I'm just saying I think that they went. I think it was hoaxed. So anyway, there was a little bit of cockatoo action for you. That's the first time you've heard that on this show, right? Cockatoo action. I'm going to leave that alone. I'm going to dance right around that. I'll leave that right there. But we talked about Apollo 11. Obviously, I always wish that there were more people in the chat room. I would have liked to have heard from other people about how the Apollo program affects their life to this day, if at all, in their opinion. And but you have an opportunity in the comments. If you're watching this show after it's aired live, you can still leave that in the comments, and I'll go back and I'll look and see what you wrote. And I think it's time for the happy music. Something I do want to mention is I'm going to be at the International UFO Congress, booth number 6, that runs September 4th through the 8th in Phoenix, Arizona, at the Sheraton Hotel and Convention Center, right smack downtown in Phoenix. They changed the venue this year. And then Saturday, October 5th, Sunday, October 6th in Pine Top, Arizona, 3.5 hours away up to the northeast at the Honda Casino and Resort. I'm going to be at Disclosure Con. That's a 1028 production. Doc Skinner's putting that on. You can go to disclosurecon.com and see what the roster for that looks like. Rumor is I'm going to be on a panel at Disclosure Con. I'll talk more about that as the time gets close. If you haven't liked, if you haven't subscribed, please do so. Hit the little bell icon. And I will be back with guests next weekend, and we'll do it all over again right here on Mysterious Forces Live. Happy 50th Apollo 11 anniversary, everyone. And take care of yourselves this week. Stay out of the heat. Stay safe. And I'll talk to you next week. Bye.